Today, I will tell you a story of love, loss, and betrayal that began on the day I buried my husband. We were gathered in Hartford's old stone church, a place where Henry and I had sat together countless Sundays before. The high ceilings arched above us, the stained glass caught the pale winter sun, and the air smelled faintly of candle wax and polished wood. It should have been a place of peace, yet it felt like the walls themselves were closing in, preparing to witness what was about to unfold. I clutched the scarf Henry had given me on our 25th anniversary, the gray wool scratchy but comforting against my cheek. That scarf had always been too warm for me, but today I wore it not for warmth, but because it still carried the faintest trace of his cologne. It was the closest thing I had to his hand on my shoulder. My heart pounded with each word of prayer, and though I bowed my head, I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on me. When the service ended, our family lawyer, Robert Hayes, stepped forward. His hair was silver now, his glasses sliding low on his nose, but his voice carried the authority of decades. The hush in the pews grew heavy as he unfolded Henry's will. The sound of the paper crackling seemed louder than the organ that had played moments earlier. "I, Henry Cole," Robert began, "being of sound mind, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, valued at $55 million in long-term stocks and investments, to my wife, Margaret Cole." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint creak of wood as people shifted in their seats, the rustle of clothing as heads turned. The numbers themselves, 55 million, seemed to echo against the stone walls, heavy and unreal. To me, they were not numbers, but years of Henry's steady patience, the way he had refused to gamble when others rushed, the way he saved instead of spent. Every dollar represented nights he had stayed late at his desk. Every stock a small piece of his belief that slow and steady was better than bold and reckless. I sat frozen, my breath shallow. This was not news to me. Henry had told me many times that he wanted me to hold everything. Still, hearing it spoken aloud in front of family and neighbors made the weight of it feel crushing. I felt eyes on me from every side, some wide with surprise, others narrowed with speculation, but none pierced like the eyes of my son. Daniel sat stiffly in the front row, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. He didn't blink. He didn't look down in grief or up in remembrance. He looked only at me, and in that gaze was not sorrow, but accusation. Beside him, Vanessa, his wife, crossed her legs and folded her manicured hands over her lap. Her face was a mask of polite restraint, but at the corners of her lips I saw it, a faint smile, sharp as glass. It was not the smile of a daughter-in-law mourning her father, but of a woman who had expected this moment and was already calculating the next step. In that instant, I remembered Daniel as a boy, the way he used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms rattled the windows, how he once told me I was his anchor, that nothing bad could happen as long as I held him. That little boy was nowhere in sight. What sat before me was a man whose hunger had consumed him, whose ambition glinted sharper than grief. As Robert continued reading through the smaller details of the will, I barely heard him. My ears rang with the sound of Henry's name, my name, and Daniel's silence. Neighbors shifted behind me. I caught whispers about numbers, about fairness, about what this meant. I kept my eyes on the scarf in my lap, twisting the wool between my fingers, praying it might tether me to something steady. When the will was fully read, the congregation began to rise, their footsteps shuffling softly against the old stone floor. Some came to me with hands on my shoulder, offering condolences in hushed voices. "Henry was a good man," they said. "You were lucky to have him." I nodded, but their words slid off me like water against glass. Daniel did not come forward at first. He waited until the others had cleared, until only a handful of people lingered in the aisles. Then he walked toward me, each step deliberate, his polished shoes striking hard against the floor. When he stopped in front of me, the church seemed to grow colder. "Mother," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut, "you don't understand money. This isn't your place." Those were the first words he spoke to me after we laid his father to rest. Not comfort, not grief, not even a moment of silence shared between us. Only that. His tone was not pleading, but commanding, as if he were already the master of what he had not been given. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw not my son, but a stranger. The face was familiar, the eyes were his, but the warmth I once knew had been replaced by steel. Vanessa stood just behind him, her lips pressed in satisfaction, as though the exchange had been rehearsed. I did not answer him then. There was nothing I could say in the hollow of that church that would not fracture us further. I turned away, the scarf pulled tight around my neck, and felt the chill of realization settle deep in my bones. This funeral was not the end of my sorrow. It was the beginning of a storm. A storm I had not chosen, but one I would be forced to face. The day after the funeral, I received Daniel's invitation. He said he wanted to share a quiet dinner, just the three of us, so that we could talk about the future. His tone on the phone was practiced, calm, almost gentle, but beneath it, I heard something sharp. I agreed, not out of trust, but because I needed to look into his eyes and know what kind of battle lay ahead. That evening I stepped into his house, a glass and steel structure in the center of Hartford. The rooms were spotless, too spotless. Every surface gleamed as though scrubbed free of any trace of real life. The smell of lemon polish filled the air, cold and sterile. This was not a home, it was a showroom. The dining table stretched long, heavy walnut, shining under white LED lights that burned too bright. Daniel was already seated at the head of the table, a folder waiting before him. Vanessa hovered nearby, her heels clicking against the tile as she carried 2 glasses of wine. She placed one in front of me, her smile thin, the kind that spoke of rehearsed civility. I declined the glass, folding my hands in my lap. Daniel pushed the folder toward me. His movements were slow, deliberate. The title printed in bold letters across the first page read, "Transfer of Assets." He leaned forward, his voice steady but cold. "Sign this, Mother. I'll handle everything. You'll be taken care of." I looked down at the papers. Every line had been prepared, every signature space already marked with my name. My pulse quickened, but my voice remained even. "What happens if I refuse?" Vanessa answered, before Daniel could speak. Her tone was sharp, dripping with contempt, disguised as concern. "You risk everything. Investments require skill. You're not trained. Daniel has the education. The market can destroy someone like you in days." She placed her hand on Daniel's arm, as though to steady him, but her eyes glittered with expectation. Daniel's lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mother, don't make this harder than it has to be. You don't understand money. I do. You sign, and everything stays simple. You don't, and you'll regret it." I picked up the pen, felt its weight press into my fingers. For a brief moment I imagined giving in. The exhaustion of the past week, the grief of Henry's passing, the suffocating glare of my son and his wife pressing down on me, surrender would have been easy. But then I remembered Henry's words: patience, discipline, principle. He had built his fortune brick by brick, and he had trusted me, not because I was skilled in finance, but because he knew I understood its meaning. Money was never just numbers. It was integrity made visible. I placed the pen back down. My hand pushed the folder across the table, sliding it firmly back to Daniel. My voice cut the air like a blade. "No." Silence fell, heavier than the storm beginning to rumble outside. Daniel's smile evaporated, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. Vanessa's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. The tension in the room was a living thing, pressing against my chest. Daniel rose slowly from his chair. His height cast a shadow across the table. "Do you realize what you're doing?" His words were low, but the fury behind them shook the space between us. I met his stare without flinching. "I realize exactly what I'm doing. I'm keeping my dignity." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vanessa exhaled sharply, setting her glass down with a thud. "You're being reckless. You think this money will protect you, but you'll end up alone and helpless. And when that happens, don't expect us to pick up the pieces. I stood, tightening the scarf around my shoulders. If that's the price of standing on my own 2 feet, I'll pay it. I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of papers shuffling, Daniel slamming the folder shut. His voice followed me to the door, bitter and sharp. "You'll regret this." The sky had already opened when I drove back toward my house. Rain slashed against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep pace. The storm outside matched the one inside me. Anger, grief, and something harder than both. A determination I had not felt in years. At last, I turned into my driveway. The electronic gate loomed ahead, its steel bars wet with rain. I rolled down my window and reached for the keypad. My fingers tapped the code I had entered thousands of times. The green light should have flashed. The gate should have opened with its familiar hum. Instead, a red glow lit the darkness. Access denied. I froze. The rain hammered my shoulders as I tried again, punching the code harder. Access denied. My breath came fast, my hands shaking. I wiped water from my eyes and tried once more, holding the numbers longer, slower. Access denied. The realization hit me like a blade to the chest. My own gate, my own home had turned me away. The account, the system, the code. Someone had changed it. Someone had made sure I no longer had access. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the rain pouring through the open window, soaking my coat, my scarf, even the seat beneath me. My voice cracked as I whispered into the storm. Even my house betrayed me. For a long moment I sat there, drenched and trembling, every beat of my heart echoing the storm above. But beneath the shock, a deeper current stirred. They thought they had broken me. They thought cutting me out of my own home would end the fight. They were wrong, because betrayal does not end a story. Betrayal begins one. The morning after the storm, I woke inside the small motel I had chosen for the night. My clothes were still damp, my body stiff, but my mind sharp. I knew Daniel and Vanessa would not stop with locking me out. They would strike at something far more fragile, my reputation. And by the time I stepped out onto Hartford's narrow main street, I saw how quickly venom could spread. 2 women stood by the bakery, their voices hushed, but their eyes darting toward me. "She forgot the gas on again," one whispered. "Nearly burned her kitchen last month." The other nodded, her lips pursed. "And bills. I heard she hasn't paid her property taxes in 6 months. Poor thing, losing her mind like that." I kept walking, my scarf pulled tight, but the sting hit deeper than the rain had. Lies travel faster than truth. With each step, I heard new fragments. Confused. Fragile. Not safe alone. Words sharp enough to carve at my dignity. By the afternoon, I received a call from my old neighbor, Mrs. Turner. Her tone was hesitant. "Margaret, I hate to say this, but people are talking. They say you left the stove running, that you've been forgetting things. I told them it wasn't true, but, well, Vanessa said she was worried for you." Vanessa, of course. The smile at the funeral had been more than satisfaction. It had been the opening of her campaign. She was not content to take my home. She would make the community believe I was unfit to live alone, unfit to hold Henry's estate. That evening, Robert Hayes called. His voice was urgent. "Margaret, I received a report. A licensed psychiatrist has submitted a statement claiming you show signs of short-term memory decline. Vanessa delivered it herself." My breath caught. "A report? I never saw any doctor." "I know," Robert replied, "but the document looks official. They'll use it to argue for guardianship, to place you under Daniel's control. It's a tactic, and a ruthless one." I sat in silence, the motel lamp buzzing faintly beside me. Henry's scarf lay across my lap. A false report, whispered lies, and a son willing to stand behind them. Rage rose in my chest, not loud, but steady, a fire I could not extinguish. The next day, I passed through the grocery store. Conversations faltered when I entered. A young cashier, no older than 20, avoided my gaze as she rang up my bread and milk. Behind me, 2 men spoke low, but not low enough. "It's sad, really. Her husband trusted her, but look at her now. Lost. I turned, meeting their eyes. Do I look lost? My tone was steady, sharper than I intended. They shifted uncomfortably, muttered excuses, and left, but I knew their words would linger in the air long after they were gone. Meanwhile, in Daniel's sleek living room, Vanessa paced, her heels clicking on the marble. "It's working," she told him. "The neighbors believe it. They see her as fragile. When the time comes, the court won't hesitate. She'll be silent, and we'll be in control." Daniel frowned, restless. "She's stubborn. She won't surrender easily." Vanessa leaned close, her voice low, poisonous. "Then we strip away her credibility. The community will believe us. By the time she realizes, she'll have nothing left but silence." Those words reached me later through a friend who overheard them. Hearing them confirmed what I already knew. This was no misunderstanding, no clash of pride. It was a deliberate attack designed to erase me before I could fight back. I sat alone that night in the cottage I managed to unlock with the spare key Henry had hidden years ago. The lake outside was dark, the water restless under the wind. I lit the old lamp, placed the scarf around my shoulders, and whispered to myself, "They will not silence me." But I also understood the danger. Reputations in small towns are fragile glass. Once cracked, they never look whole again. The whispers were not random. They were weapons, carefully placed. Every false story, every forged line on that psychiatrist's report was part of a plan. I poured tea into one of Henry's old mugs and held it steady in both hands. I thought of his words from long ago. "Patience, Margaret. The market is full of storms, but storms always reveal who built on rock and who built on sand." I would have to weather this storm as I had weathered so many before, not by shouting louder than them, but by standing steady while their lies burned out. The next morning, another neighbor crossed the street to avoid me. A man I had known for 30 years pretended not to hear my greeting. I felt the weight of isolation pressing hard, but I also felt a sharper clarity. If Vanessa believed she could bury me under whispers, she had underestimated the power of truth, because truth does not vanish in silence. Truth waits, and when the right moment comes, it cuts sharper than any rumor. The rain had not stopped since the night the gate denied me. Sheets of water blurred the windshield as I drove north, the wipers fighting to keep up. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, my knuckles pale, my chest filled with a steady resolve that surprised even me. I did not know what waited for me, but I knew where I was going. Henry once told me, half in jest, half in warning, "If the day ever comes when you feel pushed out, Margaret, go to the cottage by Candlewood Lake. That place will always open its arms to you." At the time I had laughed, brushing away the thought, but now his words rang in my ears like prophecy. The drive was long, nearly 2 hours from Hartford, through winding back roads bordered by dark pines that bent under the storm. Towns slipped by, their shops shuttered, their streets empty. Every mile took me further from Daniel's reach, further from Vanessa's whispers, and closer to the one place Henry had promised would remain mine. By the time I turned onto the gravel road that led to the cottage, the rain had softened into a mist. Headlights swept over the outline of cedar beams, the steep roof glistening wet, the lake just beyond shimmering under a break in the clouds. I pulled into the drive, shut off the engine, and sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the sound of water dripping from the trees. When I stepped out, the cold air struck me, sharp but clean. The porch creaked beneath my weight, familiar even after years of neglect. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the brass key Henry had given me decades earlier. My hand trembled as I slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance. The door opened on a rush of cedar and dust. The air smelled of wood and thyme, untouched but not unfriendly. I stepped inside, dripping onto the old floorboards. The cottage looked as though we had only left yesterday. The pine paneling, the stone fireplace, the shelves lined with books whose spines had faded from sun. A quilt still draped over the arm of the couch. I set my bag down and lit the lamp on the side table. Its yellow glow pushed back the shadows, revealing photographs that had gathered a fine coat of dust. On the mantel, A picture of Daniel at 10 years old, grinning with a fishing rod in his hands. On the wall, a framed photo of Henry and me during one of our rare vacations, the ocean behind us, his arms strong around my shoulders. I brushed dust from the frames, my fingertips lingering. The memories cut deep, sharper than the lies spreading through town. But I refused to let grief turn into weakness. Drawn to the desk near the window, I opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath old letters and stationery, lay an envelope thick and sealed. My name was written across the front in Henry's hand. I froze. The ink had bled slightly with age, but the letters were unmistakable. I lifted the envelope carefully, my hands trembling. For a moment, I could not bring myself to break the seal. I simply held it, feeling the weight of Henry's presence in the paper, the knowledge that he had thought ahead, as he always did. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of his careful script. "Margaret," it read, "if the day has come when you feel abandoned, if even Daniel turns from you, do not face it alone. I have trusted Robert, Ellen, and Victor. Robert knows the law. Ellen knows the banks. Victor knows protection. Call on them. They will stand beside you as surely as I would. You are stronger than you know. Do not let anyone make you doubt it." The words blurred through my tears. I pressed the letter to my chest, the scarf around my shoulders soaking up the drops that slipped free. The ache in my heart was sharp, but it was not despair. It was something else. Steel hardening under fire. I sat at the desk, staring out at the lake beyond the window. The storm had passed, leaving the water calm, moonlight spilling silver across its surface. I whispered into the silence, my voice steady. "You thought I was alone, Daniel. You thought you could erase me, Vanessa. But Henry saw you before I did, and he left me the strength to fight." A tear slid down my cheek, hot against the cool night, but I did not break. My shoulders straightened, my hands steadied, and I folded the letter back into its envelope. I slid it into the drawer, not hidden, but waiting. The cottage no longer felt like a relic of the past. It was a fortress, a place to gather, a place to begin again. I stood, letting my eyes trace the old wooden beams, the dusty frames, the familiar walls. This was not where my story ended. This was where it turned. And as the lake rippled quietly beyond the window, I knew one thing with certainty. They had underestimated me. The first blow came not with words, but with numbers. I had driven into town that morning, determined to hold my head high despite the whispers. I pushed my cart slowly down the aisles of the Hartford market, filling it with the ordinary things Henry and I used to buy together. Bread, milk, tea bags, apples. Each item felt like an anchor, something solid in a world that was tilting against me. When I reached the checkout, the young cashier gave me a nervous smile. I slid my debit card across the counter. She swiped it, tapped a few keys, and frowned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cole. It says declined." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Try again." She did. The same red message flashed on her screen. Declined. Her eyes flicked up, full of pity, the kind of pity that cuts deeper than scorn. Behind me, two people shifted uncomfortably, whispering. Heat rushed to my face. My voice stayed calm. "I'll use the credit card." She nodded quickly. I handed it over, praying this time the machine would beep and approve. Instead, another denial. Declined. The cashier cleared her throat. "Maybe the bank can help you reset?" Her words were soft, but I heard what she didn't say. Maybe she's confused. Maybe she doesn't know her own accounts anymore. The whispers behind me grew louder. Poor thing. First her memory, now her money. I stood frozen, every eye in that line on me, every rumor Vanessa had planted now fed by the glow of a checkout screen. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. Then a voice cut through the haze. Steady, warm, familiar. "Margaret, come with me." I turned. Ellen Parker stood at the end of the aisle, her posture tall, her presence commanding. Ellen had been my friend since college. She had also risen to become a senior director at the bank that held Henry's accounts. Her tailored suit was damp from the rain, her eyes sharp with concern. I abandoned the cart without a word and followed her out. The whispers trailed behind me, but Ellen's stride was firm, steady, pulling me back into dignity. Minutes later, we sat in her office at the bank. The blinds were drawn against the storm, the desk neat except for the files she had pulled as soon as we arrived. "Margaret," she said, her voice low, "these accounts are yours. No one, no lawyer, no child, not even Daniel, has authority to freeze them. Unless you signed paperwork, and I know you haven't, this shouldn't be happening." I swallowed hard. Then how? The cards both declined. Ellen opened the folder. "Someone submitted authorization forms last night, forged signatures. It looks like Daniel's doing. He's trying to create the illusion that you're no longer in control, that you can't even manage your own money." Her words hit like a hammer. "He locked me out of my house," I whispered. "Now he wants to lock me out of myself." Ellen reached across the desk, her hand steady on mine. "Listen to me. You're not alone. I've already reversed the freezes. The accounts are active again. I'll flag every transaction, every attempt he makes. And when this reaches court, and it will, this evidence will tear his claims apart." Relief flooded me, but so did fury. My son had not only betrayed me, he had tried to erase me in the eyes of the community and the law. Ellen's expression hardened. "He's smart, Margaret. He knows reputation and perception can matter as much as truth, but truth leaves a trail, and I'll help you follow it." I nodded, my voice steady now. "Then let him come. Let him try. I won't bow to forged papers and poisoned words." Ellen smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried steel beneath it. That's the Margaret I remember. As I left the bank, the rain had lightened, though the sky was still heavy. I pulled Henry's scarf close around my shoulders. For the first time since the funeral, I felt not just wounded, but armed. They had underestimated me. Ellen was proof I was not as alone as Daniel and Vanessa believed. They thought stripping me of money would strip me of power. Instead, it lit a fire. And fires, once lit, do not die easily. Daniel called that morning with a voice too polite to trust. "Mother, come to dinner tonight. Vanessa and I want to talk calmly, as a family." Calm was the last thing I expected. Still, I agreed. I needed to see what their next move would be. That evening, I walked into their dining room. The table was set for 3, but the atmosphere was tighter than a drawn bowstring. The chandelier cast a sterile glow, bouncing off polished silverware that looked as sharp as weapons. Daniel poured wine, his smile rehearsed. Vanessa adjusted her napkin with calculated grace. We ate in near silence at first, only the clink of cutlery filling the air. Every glance they exchanged was a message I wasn't supposed to hear. My stomach tightened with each bite, though the food had no taste. At last, Vanessa leaned back, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Margaret, let's stop pretending. You know Daniel is the future. He has the education, the experience. If you really love your son, you would hand the reins to him. Let the generation with knowledge and vision lead. All you're doing now is clinging to what is old, what is fading." Her words dripped with contempt, each syllable meant to humiliate. She smiled faintly, as if the logic were undeniable, as if I had no ground to stand on. I set my fork down, folded my hands in my lap, and looked directly at her. My voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Vanessa, love is not measured by how much money you pass down. Love is measured by how much responsibility you entrust. Henry trusted me because he knew I understood the weight of responsibility. That hasn't changed." Daniel's jaw tightened, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her smile faltering. The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. She tried again, her tone sharper. "Responsibility? What responsibility do you think you're holding? These are numbers, investments, deals. You don't belong in that world. We do. You're only standing in the way of progress." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady. "Progress without principle is just destruction in disguise. You think you deserve this because you studied the language of markets. But you've forgotten the language of integrity. And without that, money is nothing but fuel for greed." For the first time, Vanessa had no quick reply. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her face betrayed the anger she was trying to conceal. Daniel finally spoke, his tone cold and clipped. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Do you really want the whole town to keep whispering about you? Do you want to end up alone with nothing but stubborn pride?" I looked at him, at the boy who once begged me to stay by his bed after nightmares, and I felt a pang of sorrow. But sorrow did not weaken me. My voice was firm. "If standing alone is the price of keeping my dignity, then I will pay it, because dignity, once surrendered, never returns." The silence after those words was unbearable, even for them. Vanessa's hand tightened around her wine glass, her knuckles white. She forced a smile, but her voice shook. "You think strength is in saying no, but you'll see, Margaret. Soon, everyone will see that you're not strong at all." I rose from my seat, pushing the chair back quietly. "Strength isn't about appearances, Vanessa. It's about what survives when the storm passes, and I promise you, I will survive." Their eyes followed me as I walked out of the dining room. I could feel the fury boiling beneath their composure, the way predators bristle when their prey refuses to cower. That dinner had not broken me, it had only shown them that I would not bend, and for that I knew they would strike harder. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth was supposed to shine, but often struggled beneath shadows. I sat at the long table, my scarf draped neatly across my shoulders, my back straight. Daniel sat across from me, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. Vanessa was beside him, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a predator certain the trap was closing. Judge Morrison entered, gray-haired but sharp, his gavel striking once. "We are here to consider the petition for guardianship of Margaret Cole, filed by her son, Daniel Cole, and supported by medical documentation. Counsel, you may proceed." Vanessa's lawyer rose first, a polished man with a silver tie. He laid out their argument with confidence. "Your Honor, Mrs. Cole is 70 years old. Recent evidence suggests she suffers from lapses in memory and judgment. For her protection, her son seeks guardianship to manage her estate, valued at $55 million. He gestured toward the witness stand. A psychiatrist in a neat gray suit approached, carrying a file. His voice was steady as he spoke. "Based on my evaluation, I conclude that Mrs. Cole exhibits signs of short-term memory decline. She may forget critical details, such as financial deadlines or even basic safety." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. My pulse hammered, but I lifted my chin. I had never met this man. He was a phantom, conjured by Vanessa's money and influence. My lawyer, Robert Hayes, rose slowly. His presence was calm, but commanding. "Your Honor, before this testimony is accepted, I must note, my client has never been examined by this doctor. This so-called report is based on second-hand accounts, not direct observation. Furthermore, I have here complete financial records from the past 6 months." He lifted a thick folder and approached the bench. Every transaction, every bill, every investment handled personally by Mrs. Cole. Not a single error, not a single late payment. In fact, her accounts reflect precision most young professionals fail to achieve. The judge flipped through the pages. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the shuffle of paper. Daniel shifted in his chair, the first crack in his armor. Vanessa's smile tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed forward. Robert continued, his voice firmer now. "This is not a case of protection. This is a case of power. Mrs. Cole is of sound mind and capable judgment. The only thing she suffers from is a son and daughter-in-law who would strip her of dignity for their own gain." My hands clasped in my lap, I whispered a single word to myself. "Steady." The judge set down the file. His gaze swept the room. "These are serious allegations. Forged or exaggerated medical reports will not be tolerated. At this stage, I am not prepared to grant guardianship. The matter will remain under review until further evidence is presented." A collective breath filled the room. Vanessa's nails dug into her purse strap. Daniel's jaw flexed. Their victory had slipped through their fingers, at least for now. The gavel struck again. "Court is adjourned." As the room emptied, Vanessa leaned toward me, her voice low, venomous. "This isn't over. You won't last, Margaret. Everyone will see soon enough." I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. Love isn't giving someone control. Love is giving them responsibility, and responsibility is what you will never understand. Her lips pressed tight, fury flashing across her face. She turned away, but I knew my words had landed. I walked out of that courtroom, not triumphant, but unbroken. They had tried to bury me beneath lies and forged papers. Instead, I had stood, and the ground beneath me had held. The battle was not finished, but for the first time, I felt the tide shift. The knock on the cottage door was hard, impatient. Rain pounded on the roof, the storm outside no softer than the one I knew was waiting at my threshold. I pulled Henry's scarf tighter around my shoulders and opened the door. Daniel stood there, his face set in cold determination, and beside him was a stranger in a gray suit carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Daniel didn't wait for an invitation. He brushed past me into the living room, the advisor following smoothly, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. "Mother," Daniel said sharply, "this is Mr. Kane, a senior financial advisor. He's here to help you correct your mistakes. We don't have time to waste. You need to sign the documents now, before you lose everything." Mr. Kane smiled in a way that was meant to soothe, but to me it felt rehearsed, oily. He placed the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a crisp snap. Papers slid out, neat, intimidating. "Mrs. Cole," he said gently, his tone like honey over steel, "you've done well for your age, but large estates like yours are complex. Mistakes are common. At your stage of life, it's easy to miss details. Let us take this burden from you." I stayed standing, my eyes on the folder. My voice was calm but firm. "I haven't asked for help, and I won't sign away what Henry entrusted to me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mother, stop pretending. You don't understand these markets. I do. Vanessa does. You're clinging to what you can't manage." The air in the room thickened. My pulse hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Clinging is what a drowning man does, Daniel. What I hold isn't desperation. It's principle." His face flushed. "If you loved me, you'd prove it by trusting me with this. Why do you keep fighting your own son?" Before I could answer, the door opened again. Robert Hayes stepped in, his briefcase under his arm, his presence commanding even in the quiet room. His eyes swept over Daniel and the advisor before settling on me. "Margaret," he said warmly, "I thought I might be needed here." Daniel bristled. "You don't belong here, Robert. This is a family matter." Robert's tone sharpened. "Then let's speak as family. Or do you want me to start with these?" He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. He laid them on the table right beside the advisor's contracts. "These are credit card statements, Daniel. Every charge tied to your father's account. Casino withdrawals, luxury purchases, late-night transfers to cover gambling debts. Do you want me to read them aloud?" Daniel's face drained of color. He reached for the papers, but Robert's hand came down firm. "Don't. These are copies. The originals are secured. You see, Margaret, your son has a long history of financial recklessness. He's not here to protect you. He's here to erase you so he can cover what he already squandered." The advisor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his polished composure cracking. "I wasn't aware of—" he began, but Robert cut him off. "You weren't aware because you didn't care to ask, or perhaps because you profit from clients like Daniel. Either way, I suggest you leave before this becomes part of the record." The advisor's smile faltered. He gathered his papers quickly, stuffing them back into his briefcase. His voice dropped, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Cole, I'll step back. Clearly this is more complicated than presented." With that, he moved toward the door, eager to escape the storm inside. Daniel exploded. "You're turning everyone against me. You think standing with Robert makes you strong? You're my mother. You're supposed to be on my side." I met his rage with calm. "Being your mother doesn't mean surrendering my integrity. Henry trusted me for a reason. And I will not betray that trust. Not for you, not for anyone. Daniel's voice cracked, louder now, almost desperate. You're against me, Mother. You're choosing strangers over your own son. I stood tall, my hands steady on the back of the chair. No, Daniel. I'm choosing truth over lies. And until you understand the difference, you'll never stand on the side of family. The words landed heavier than any gavel. For a moment, Daniel looked small, cornered, furious, but powerless. He turned on his heel and stormed out into the rain, the door slamming behind him. Robert gathered the scattered papers and placed them back in his briefcase. His voice softened as he looked at me. This was only one battle, Margaret. He'll strike again, but he showed his weakness today,